Good morning, folks. So, a bit of breakfast waffles for my kids, but I want to speak to this conversation around following Jesus outside of the box of institutional church or outside of the system or outside of the four walls. And the reason for this is I've had a number of questions already from people over the last couple of weeks asking, how do I follow Jesus, or what does following Jesus look like outside of that? And so, if you are a follower of Jesus who you deeply love Jesus, you deeply respect the journey, and you deeply want to walk out this journey with integrity and steward it well. If that's you, then this conversation might be very helpful for you. As I said, over the last couple of weeks, I've had this conversation come up, and I also had somebody message from the United States, from America, and they shared how they've spent a lot of time in the underground churches in Iran and in China, but they've come back to the West and they're really struggling just to go along with institutional Christianity, the institutional church here in the West. And I get that, because when you've experienced something like Iran and China, and if you didn't know, that's where the gospel is just exploding at the moment. That's where the fastest growth is happening. When you see something like that, you can't unsee it. And it's very difficult to shift out of that. And we can speak to that for a bit, because Tasha and I spent part of our honeymoon visiting and ministering in the sex trafficking projects in China. And I can promise you that single event shifted my entire faith for the better. And that's another conversation for another time, but it was incredibly humbling. And I saw the Father in a totally different way that I'd missed before. And so all of that to say is that there are a large population of believers who are following Jesus deeply and just desire the simplicity of the gospel. They're feeling dissatisfied or disillusioned or displaced when it comes to Christianity as we know, or institutional Christianity, the institutional church, versus just the simple gospel of following Jesus. And so I want to speak to this a bit today, because I don't know that there's been much healthy conversation around it, if any conversation at all. I'm aware that there are a lot of views, perspectives, and messages that are spoken in a way that almost demonize people who walk and follow Jesus outside of the system, outside of the boxes, so to speak. And so I want to speak to this because I do believe that there needs to be a healthy and helpful conversation around it. I want to share a bit about my story, my journey, but also just to bless and encourage you as you're walking out this journey. Yep, that's Miss Liliana. As you're walking out this journey with Jesus. And so I'm going to bring you throughout my day. Just made breakfast waffles for the kids. There's a lot of washing to do because one of our girls had a bit of an accident last night. So there's plenty of washing to do. And like I've said, guys, I'm just bringing you raw, real time, giving you a window into what our life with Jesus looks like in real time. Unscripted, unedited, just life with Jesus, because Jesus isn't just a Sunday morning event. He's a lifestyle. And Jesus isn't just with you in the quiet time. He's with you in every time. And so whether that's making waffles, whether that's hanging out the washing, whether it's time with your kids, Jesus is with you in all of it. And that's one of the beautiful, simple parts of the gospel. In the same way that Adam walked in the cool of the garden with the Father, we get to walk through the cool of life, all of life, with him. And so I'm going to bring you throughout my day. We're going to speak to this conversation, this topic around following Jesus outside of the box of institutional church, the four walls, or the system. So we'll see how we go. All right, washing load number one. So this conversation, following Jesus outside of the box of institutional Christianity. So I've already shared a bit about my story in various videos, but just in case for those who have missed it or haven't caught the context, I'll just share very briefly again that I came to faith at the age of 20 after a bright light out-of-body experience. And for those first 6 months of my journey with Jesus, I wasn't part of any local church, any institutional church. I wasn't part of any denomination. All I had was a Bible, and a friend had given me worship music at that time. I believe it was Darling Chick, if I remember correctly. And all I would do for the first two hours of my day is I would wake up before I head off to work, and I would read the scriptures. I would talk to this Jesus guy, or ask Jesus to reveal himself to me, show me who he is. And I would sing the songs that were on the CD. And that's all I would do for the first 6 months of my faith. And in those 6 months, I saw some tremendous things take place in my own nature. So I saw the changes and differences that took place within me. My family saw it, so it couldn't be argued against. And the fruit was very real in myself. Not only that, I was seeing some tremendous miracles take place on the streets, at friends' barbecues, because the reality of the scriptures were coming alive in me. And I was reading it, and then I was going, wow, Jesus, teach me this. And then I was seeing it happen in real life. I quickly then was seeing friends come to faith. I saw my family come to faith. And then I was being invited to speak at friends' home groups and even youth groups. And so all of this was happening outside of the institutional church, outside of institutional Christianity. And so I wanted to say that because those first 6 months of my faith, oh man, it was so enjoyable. It was so fun, and it was so simple, and it was light and easy. And I often think back to those days and I think, man, those are some of my favorite days ever. After those 6 months, I then joined a local church, an institutional church, and it was very helpful because it was great to find people who could put language to your experiences and who were also on this journey, following Jesus. And I found it really helpful. When I joined the institution, I quickly climbed the ranks, so to speak, in that I was soon part of the preaching roster. I was soon part of the leadership, the ministry, Bible college, internship, then the national director of a international Christian organization. So I was in the thick of it. And then the simplicity, the ease, the light and easiness that I experienced in those first 6 months, it was like it was stripped away or was robbed. It was like religion had crept in, or the institutional framework system had crept in and robbed my innocence, or stolen my innocence, if you like. And so what was just wake up and spend 2 hours and just be with Jesus was now taken over by 3 ways, 5 steps, 7 formulas in order to be with him, instead of just the simplicity of be with him. And so what was light and easy in those first 6 months now became hard and heavy. And it was very difficult to walk out, and I couldn't understand why it was happening. And because I was still young in faith and young in general, I was just taking what I was learning, and I was just wanting to be humble to learn and take that all on board. But the journey became hard and heavy. And not only that, I noticed and saw in myself how pride would creep in, because all of a sudden people were putting me on this pedestal. They're like, man, look at this young guy, this passionate guy who's seen these amazing things. And I had so much zeal, but I had no maturity, no wisdom. And so when people elevate you and put you on a platform, so to speak, or on a pedestal, that can really ruin somebody who is not mature or ready, if I can say it in that way. And so ultimately it became hard and heavy. Within all of that, I also became frustrated with some of the things that I was seeing and not seeing. And I would ask questions, and it just ended up, it was too hard and heavy to the point where I just had to leave that space, because those first 6 months of my faith, I couldn't escape it, because it was so real. And I had tasted and seen that the Father truly and really and only is good. But what I was experiencing now was very different. And so I had to pull away from that to come back to the simplicity and just Jesus. What happened to those early days? Why does it not feel the same way? Why do you feel distant? Why do I feel like I have to go through all these hoops to get to you now, as opposed to just wake up and be with you? And so I learned a few things from that, and I realized that this was not the simplicity of the gospel. This was the institutional entity and system and religion and its simplicity that had crept in. And so when I'm talking about the institution, by the way, I'm not talking about people. And this is probably one of my biggest frustrations at the moment, is that there is Big C church, which is the body of Christ. And I have a problem with the word church, because if you know the history about it, where it comes from, it's not helpful. But that's another conversation for another time. I prefer the word ecclesia or ecclesia, or even just assembly, like the people. So anyway, there is capital C church, which is the people. And I love the people, and I'm willing to lay my life down for the people, and that's why I do what I do. But then there is little c church, which is institution. Now, my frustration is that many times when you speak about the little c institution, people immediately think you're talking about the big C people, and it's not what I'm talking about. And so because we have these definitions and these terms, and we intertwine the two meanings of these two C's, for example, when you try to speak to the institution, that can actually be very destructive and very abusive towards people immediately think you're talking about the people. And so now, oh, this guy's just slandering people, and he's slandering pastors and leaders, and it's like, it's not even what I'm talking to. And so that's half the problem, of our conversations today, is that we're not defining our terms, or we haven't understood our terms. And so when I'm talking about institution, I'm talking about the entity, the system. I'm not talking about the people. I love the people, and I'm willing to lay my life down for the people. And so anyway, I had to pull out of the institution, because it was taking me away from the simplicity of the gospel, but also I had to learn to see the difference between the people, the little c and the big C as well, because part of it, then it led me to think, oh, well, if this is happening in the church and the institution, then it must be the people's fault. And to a degree, I understand that, yep, the system, the institution can influence the people, and the people, to a large part, add to the institutional mindset and thinking. But I just had to pull back. I had to pull out because it was no longer the simplicity of the gospel. It was no longer light and easy. In fact, it felt very hard and heavy. So that's just very quickly a little bit about my story and a bit of context behind these three things that I want to share when it comes to following Jesus outside of the system. Before I share those three things, actually, I read this quote years ago by a gentleman named Reggie McNeil. So he's a very respected, well-known thought leader in the Christian space. He's planted churches, he's been a pastor, but he's also been in the kingdom-centric space as well. So he's been in both worlds, so to speak. Anyway, he says this: a growing number of people are leaving the institutional church for a new reason. They are not leaving because they have lost their faith. They are leaving the institution to preserve their faith. And so for many of you, maybe like myself, you've become dissatisfied, disillusioned, displaced with the institution, not necessarily the people, but the institution. And you've been called outside of those four walls. You've been called outside of the box to preserve your faith. You're not running away from Jesus. You're not necessarily, as somebody commented, butthurt at the people. It's such an ignorant and just, foolish label. But you're not necessarily walking away because you are anti or angry at the people. Rather, you understand and see that the institutional framework, the system, the entity is stripping you or encroaching on your faith, and you need to come away, like Reggie McNeil says, to preserve your faith. And so I want to say first and foremost that you're not alone, and that this is a common occurrence for many people. And I think it's something that has been happening for years, for decades even, but it was quiet and under the radar. And part of the reason for that is because, as I said in the beginning, we have demonized people who walk with Jesus outside of the four walls. And so when somebody is dissatisfied or disillusioned with the institution, or when Jesus has just straight up called them out of the system, they go quietly because they understand that there'll be backlash for that. And so maybe you have had the backlash. Maybe you've been called backslidden. Maybe you've been called a lone ranger. Maybe you've been called rebellious or a rogue, or all the things that I have been called myself. I get it. And it's incredibly painful to endure, and it's not helpful, and it definitely can create this divide, within the capital C church, within the body. And so I know all about that, but I want to say to you that you're not alone, and you are coming away, you're learning to follow Jesus outside of the system in order to not just preserve your faith, but also come into deeper and richer experiences with him. So there are three things that I want to say about this. I'm going to grab another load, or I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to take you with me, and we're going to go through, just share about those 3 points that I want to speak to when it comes to following Jesus outside of the system. All right, washing load number 2 is here. It's a good day. Anyway, this conversation. Here are the 3 points that I wanted to share around following Jesus outside of the box. So the first one is that in the kingdom, there are no boxes, there is only a body. So religion creates these boxes, and those boxes create division. They create condemnation, they create pride, if you tick the box, and they are ultimately not helpful. And so if I define religion very quickly, religion can be defined, I like to define it at least, in 3 words, and that is performance, control, and fear. So performance, meaning you must do something in order to be something in God. So you must perform this in order to be a good Christian, for example. Then there is control. So control is you must do it the way that we say or else. An example of that is when Jesus healed the man with the withered hand on the Sabbath. And you'll notice that the Pharisees did not argue against him healing the lame man. They argued that he did it on the Sabbath. And so they don't necessarily mind what you do, they just mind the way that you do it. And so that's an example of control. And then there is fear. And so fear is often the driver that they use to make you perform and control. So if you don't perform and control and tick this box, then they use fear to condemn you for that, or to force you into folding and giving into their boxes. So that's how I define religion very quickly. So religion, there are many boxes, but in the kingdom, there are no boxes. There is just his body. And so the contrast between these are very helpful to see and to recognize. Getting myself all tangled up here. So an example of a box within institutional Christianity today, one box might say, you must do this in order to be blessed by God. So, for example, you must go to a local church on a Sunday in order to be blessed by God. Or you must fast for 10 days in order to be blessed by God. Whatever that is, you insert it, but that's an example of a box. But in the kingdom, in the body, because there are no boxes, the kingdom says, you're already blessed with every spiritual blessing. Another box in religion will say that you must do something in order to earn something. But in the kingdom, it's your Father's good pleasure to freely give you the kingdom. That's the body. Another box might say you must work in order to whatever, receive something, have something, become something. But in the kingdom, it's not about your work, it's about his finished work. And now instead, I enter into his finished work, I cease from my works, and now I rest. Those are the realities, the simplicity of the gospel that he is always inviting us into, but religion wars against them with its boxes. And so we have many people who are intertwining the simple gospel with these boxes. And it's hard because many of those boxes are wrapped in Christian language, or they're wrapped in Jesus language. And so many people can't see the difference. Like those 3 examples I gave here, do this to be blessed, and yet you're already blessed with every spiritual blessing. Or 2 Peter, you've already been given everything pertaining to life and godliness. So the gospel is very simple. It's not about your works, it's about his finished work. It's not about my performance, it's about his perfect performance. Now we enter into that rest, and by doing so, we've ceased from our works, and now we freely receive what he already wanted to give us from the beginning. This is the simplicity of the gospel. So when Jesus was asked, what must we do to work the works of God? His response was, believe. That's it. He didn't dish out a list of things they must do in order to work the works of God. He said, believe in the one whom he sent. That's it. But religion is offended by that, because religion, the flesh, the carnal part of us, it wants for gratification. It wants to be able to say, I did it. I made it happen. I made it work. Work. But in the kingdom, as I've already said, it's not about your work. It's about his finished work. That's the simplicity of the gospel. But it is so offensive to the religious mindset, to the carnal mindset. And yet it's the way of agape. It's the way of your good Father. And so in the kingdom, there are no boxes. There is only a body. And in this body, Jesus is growing us up into the fullness and stature of Christ. He's the one who's growing us into that. And in his body, we have different parts that we function in. So while religion creates boxes that divide us, in his body, we have different functions and parts, but we're still part of one body. So there is no division. There is only unity, oneness in Christ. And so I may look different than you. I may walk different than you, and I may have a different path than you, but I'm still part of the same body with you. In religion, we create these boxes that now create this division and justify it. And yet that's not the way of the Father. And it's harder when those boxes, as I said, are wrapped in Christian language. And so there are no boxes. There is only a body. And in that body, you have a unique function. And that is a function that God has prepared for you from the beginning. So as Paul says, he has already created for us good works ahead that we are to walk out and fulfill in him. And it's the Father, by his Spirit, he gives us the will and the desire to do those things. And we get to walk it out with him. And so whether your calling is within an institutional setting or outside of the institutional setting, that now becomes secondary. And this is the point that I'm trying to make, is that this conversation, this divide that often exists in a lot of our Christianity, they go to church, or they don't go to church, or they're religious, or they're rogue, or whatever, those labels, those things begin to disappear when we understand we are one in Christ. So I have friends who pastor institutional churches. I speak in institutional churches quite often. I've already spoken this year, and I'm speaking more this year. I love the body. I love the people. And I'm not offended by people who live in that place. They're called in that place because it's about the people. But I've matured into that space by understanding and knowing there are no boxes. There is only a body. And to me, that's the simple gospel. So that's the first point. There are no boxes. There is only a body. And in that body, you have your unique function. And if part of that function looks like you coming outside, walking outside of the system, walking outside of the institution, you must be free to do that. If part of your function looks like being within the institution, serving the people within there, you must be free to do that as well. And so this creates the joy, the beauty, the oneness that I believe he always intended for us. And so that's the first part I would say. There are no boxes. There is only a body. And it is a body that he is growing up, and he does it by his power, not by us performing and ticking off boxes. The second thing that I would say is that you discern and hear his voice more than you probably give yourself credit for. Now, this is a conversation that I'm having a lot lately, and I'm just growing more and more convinced that people have actually discerned and heard his voice all along, but it's these boxes, it's these frameworks that we've set up, and the fear that has caused us to hesitate, to doubt and question that. So Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice. He didn't say may or might. He said, you and I hear his voice. So we're hearing his voice. He also said, I will send you the Spirit of truth, and he will lead you into all truth. So that's his idea. That's not my idea. But a large part of religion has created these boxes that said, this is the way you must hear God, or this is the evidence of hearing God, and this is the only way in order to follow God if you claim to hear God. And by doing so, it's created a lot of fear and hesitation in people. And I understand and know that there has been a lot of misuse and abuse around hearing the voice of God and the prophetic and spiritual gifts. I'm very aware of that. I've been guilty of it myself. I've been on the receiving end of it, so I'm very aware of it. But a major problem, and something that I think is a shame, is that too many Christians seem to have more faith in the devil's ability to deceive us than they do in Holy Spirit's ability to lead us into all truth. I think that's a real shame. And yet Jesus said, I will lead you into all truth. So the simplicity of the gospel understands and knows that he's faithful to do that. Jesus is a faithful shepherd. And I believe that if he said that he can lead you into all truth and that you hear his voice, then you do. And now it's just becoming a child to trust him in that and follow that. That's the simplicity of the gospel. But like I said, religion has created these boxes that say this is how you must perform to that. And all it's done is it's created fear, hesitation, and doubt. And now we question ourselves. In fact, we start to outsource confirmation. So the Spirit of God is saying something to us, and we know that, but we're so fearful because of these boxes, because of religion. And so now we outsource it. We need other people to affirm it for us, or to confirm it for us. I'm not against counsel. That's not what I'm speaking about. But I'm speaking about the fear that religion has created. And now we're living more by fear than just trusting like a child and following his voice. So if you look at the birds, for example, I mean, I'm watching some of the birds here. When a bird is born, they instinctively know where to find food, how to build a nest, how to fly with the seasons. They need nobody else to tell them how to do. Why? Because they're simply living in their design from their creator. Or if you look at the fish of the sea, fish instinctively know how to swim with the tides, how to find food, where to find home. No other creature, no human, no bird told them how to live that way. They just simply follow and instinctively know the design by their creator. And so the same is true for you and I as humans, but for some reason we've forgotten that. And a large part of it is because religion has perverted it and made us scared of it. And so now instead of just following that instinct, that GPS of the Spirit of truth, just like a bird or a fish does, we question it, we doubt it, and we start to outsource it. And so I believe that part of what the Father's doing at this time is he is removing those layers, those scales, those things that have hindered us from simply following his voice. And those things are being peeled back, and we're learning just to be led by the Spirit of God. As Paul says, as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are the sons of God. And so I believe for many of you, what I'm sharing is nothing new. All these videos that I've been sharing and talking about while I'm hanging out my washing, it's nothing new to you. This is stuff that you've already known by the Spirit, through the Spirit of truth in you. And so if anything, I'm just affirming it, saying, yeah, you already knew. And now I want to say, be bold and courageous to follow that. You must be free and you must be okay to follow that, because your Father is a faithful shepherd. And he said he'll lead you into all truth. And you know that voice, you know that Spirit, and it's about following that and being free to follow that like a child. Now I understand that recognizing her voice might be part of the challenge, but that's part of growing up into this as well. So for example, let's say that there was a whole crowd of voices just yelling right now. Well, within that crowd, there's also your Father's voice. And so it's not that you don't hear his voice, but it's just learning to recognize that voice amidst all the other voices. And so that's part of the journey through that as well. Hi, McGill. So that's the second one. You hear his voice. Here's a quote by Joy Dawson. So she was a renowned author and Bible teacher, and she said this: I would rather pay the price to hear God's voice personally, regardless of how difficult the circumstances may be, than to settle for always hearing from him secondhand. So you hear his voice and you discern his voice more than you probably give yourself credit for. And it's about having the freedom to follow that and learn to walk that out with your good Father. Even though religion will try to bash you and say how it should look, you must be free to follow and trust him like a child, because he is faithful. He is a faithful shepherd. And that's really ultimately all we're learning to do here, guys, is just following him, following the shepherd, regardless of whether that's in the system or outside the system. That becomes secondary. It's about following your good Father. And you must know that he is faithful to lead you and to guide you in that. So that's the second one. You discern and hear his voice more than you give yourself credit for. The third and final one I want to say is that mess is allowed. So religion hates mess. In the eyes of religion or performance Christianity, mess looks like a negative. It looks evil. It looks bad. But in this journey of maturity, you and I are going to make a mess. I have made plenty of mess along the way. It hasn't been my intent, my desire, but that's just part of the journey. It doesn't make you evil. It doesn't make you a bad person. It just simply reveals the maturing of a son who's growing up to be like their good father. So when I look at my kids, for example, when they're learning to walk, they fumble, they fall, they make a mess. I mean, if I took you inside right now, you'll see there's so much chaos in there. But this reveals also that there are kids who are growing up, who are learning their skills, their capabilities, their hand-eye coordination, their balance, their strength. it also reveals a home that is full of love and safety and security, and they have this freedom to be who they are and to grow up into their physical capabilities and capacity. I once heard somebody say this, that the birthing room is very messy, but the cemetery is very clean. But only one of those places has life, the birthing room. And so a large part of what religion will try to do is they try to shut out the mess. But by doing so, you remove life. So when you think about the birthing room, there's yelling, there's screaming, there's blood. It's very messy. But then you look at the cemetery, it's very well ordered, it's very clean, it's very serene and peaceful. But only one of those places have life. And so many times religion will try to get us to prevent or try not to get into mess because they think it's a negative thing. But by doing so, you're putting a cap on life. My 1-year-old at the moment, who you just saw here, Esther, she's climbing everything. She's just making so much mess at the moment. It's like a tornado when you go inside. But in that, she's learning all her capabilities. But if I was to squash her because I was so offended by the mess, all I'll be doing is I'll be putting a limitation and I'll be handicapping her capabilities. And so she'll grow up with this limited mindset, this limited emotional capacity, this limited physical capacity, all because daddy wanted to be more tidy and wanted to prevent the mess. That's not what your good father's like with us. And he's the one who's created, he's put this process into all of creation, that when you put a seed into a ground, it doesn't grow an apple tree the next day. There's got to be a root system that's built first. Then there's a sprout, there's a shooting up. Then there's a fruitfulness, then there's a flourishing. Or when you're first conceived, 9 months until that comes. So there are these processes, these times, these seasons that God has put into all creation, but it seems that religion tries to cap that and shut it out. And yet when it comes to our spiritual growth, that should be the most important part that we really nurture and steward well. And so all of that to say is that you must be okay with the mess. Your good father is not offended by it. He walks with you in it. And in the same way that I celebrate and that I delight in the process of my kids growing up into their capacity, they've already got 2 arms, they've already got 2 legs, they're just growing up into that. In the same way that I delight in that, your good father delights in you growing up into him too. We're growing into the fullness and stature of Christ. We've already been given everything pertaining to life and godliness. We've already been blessed with every spiritual blessing, and we already have the Spirit of Christ. Your spirit man is absolutely perfect. Our journey now is about growing up into the fullness of that. And along the way, you're going to make a mess. You're going to fumble. You're going to get things wrong. But no child, when they're learning to walk, who fumbles, gets up and says, I believe this walking thing's just not for me. That's foolish. And so same with you and I in this journey. Religion hates the mess. But your good father's not offended by it. He's not allergic by it. And you must be free to walk out this journey with him, because in the mess, you're learning your hand-eye coordination. You're learning your strength. You're learning your balance. You're learning how to walk and then eventually run. This is part of the process and journey of maturity. And you must be free to make the mess. So that's the third and final one that I want to say there. So again, as I wrap up these 3, number 1, there are no boxes, only a body. And it's a body that he is building. And in that body, we have different functions. There is no division here. We're all one in him, even though we may function differently, and that's okay. So there are no boxes. There is only a body. Secondly, you hear and discern his voice more than you probably give yourself credit for. And you must be free to follow the voice of your good shepherd, and know that when you're following him and it isn't quote unquote correct, he's still able to make all things work for your good, because you love him and you want to steward well the purposes and the calling that he has for you. So that's the second one. You discern and hear his voice, and you must be free to follow that. And as you're doing all of that, learning how to function in your part in the body and following his voice, you're going to make a mess. And that's okay. He's not allergic to it. He's not offended by it. He celebrates your growth in it, because like a child, you're just learning to grow up in him. So you're learning to just be a son who's walking like Adam in the cool of life with him. And your father delights in that growth along the way. Religion hates the mess. They try to control the mess and get you to perform to prevent the mess. But your good father delights in it, because he knows in doing so, all your capabilities are being fine-tuned, are being developed, and are growing along the way. So it's a good thing. So again, body, no boxes. You hear his voice and the mess is allowed. So I bless you, and I bless you in your journey with him. And irrespective of whether you're walking in the system, outside the system, that becomes secondary. Ultimately, we're just learning to walk out this life with our good father. That is the simple gospel. And it's that simple gospel in those first 6 months of my faith that completely changed everything for me. And I'm thankful that I was able to regain that same space in him with a greater degree and measure of maturity. And now I enjoy that simple gospel every single day, in the same way that Adam walked in the cool of the garden with the Father. I get to enjoy this life with him. And this is the invitation that he is putting out to all of us, to you, to me, to everybody. There are no boxes that you must tick to do it. It's simply believe. What must we do to work the works of God? Believe. And from that place of receiving him, deep intimacy, oneness, and relationship with him, everything else naturally follows. Jesus did not come to establish and set up a religion. He came to restore us back to a relationship that was once enjoyed in the garden, was lost in the garden, but he's brought us back to that, and now we get to enjoy it here and now today. So bless you.